We are all sinners, we hear. Atheists have rejected God because they just want to sin. Never mind that I don't believe in sin as a category of wrongdoing, because it is predicated on believing that there are actions that offend a God. And I don't believe in any God, so how can I offend them? Also, never mind that a lot of Christians seem to think that good actions are not the way to get into heaven. You just have to accept Jesus. Rinse, repeat. Let's talk about sin, the ways Christians can elide the various types of sin and slide from one definition to another, and why, in the end, we should embrace a whole category of what is deemed to be sin as affirming of the only life we know we have. Hi, my name is Scarlett, and I am an atheist and skeptic. And recently, I've been contemplating what exactly is meant by sin, and I'm interested in the 7 deadly sins and their corresponding virtues. When we hear the word sin, the first image that might come to mind is all manner of wrongdoing, images of murder, thieves, people who just want to harm other people come to mind. And yet, a lot of what Christians preach against is sex. Having the wrong kind of sex offends the Lord. Being the wrong gender offends the Lord. In fact, thinking the wrong thoughts already offends God. And that too is sin. Sin is also not being holy enough, not depriving oneself enough. Much of the time, the only harm being done is a sense of shame at being human. Before getting into the deadly sins, let's look at some extracts about sin from the Stanford Encyclopedia to guide our discussion, why the virtues and vices would be helpful to somebody who's interested in avoiding sin. Now, this is a long entry, and we are only going to focus on some parts. We aren't going to talk about original sin or the existence of free will, which occupies a great deal of the page. What I'm interested in is the various definitions of sin. Obviously, sin can be conceived as action, and so in this encyclopedia entry, they talk about omissions as well as commissions. So we sin when we do something wrong that's harmful, but we also sin when we do not do a duty that we owe to somebody. This is summed up in this passage. We sin then if we knowingly do that which we know we ought not, and if we knowingly do not do that which we know we ought. But there are also thought crimes, like in this passage. According to many views, we also sin when we internally endorse a sinful action, whether or not we carry through with that endorsement and perform the action. And this is infamously the passage where Jesus said, "But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So again, thought crime. Thought crime is sin because it is separating you from the Lord. It is creating bad action for you. I think that the category is clear enough about committing actions that are harmful or omitting actions that we owe other people, whether we agree with the specific actions that Christians consider sins or not. I think we can all understand this as a moral category. Now, the thought crime, I think this is something where we would not want to say that you are actually a bad person for having a thought. And I dispute the notion that because you have a thought in that case, that you actually approve the action. So you can look at somebody with lust in your heart, but not have any intention to act on that lust. And I think that this is a place where the sin is not very helpful. So the thought crime continues in this next category, which is called sin as disposition. And this is very simply put an inclination or disposition to engage in sinful action. And the entry writer quotes Plantinga, where we don't center God, basically. That's the sum of it. Our affections are skewed, directed to the wrong objects. We love and hate the wrong things. Instead of seeking first the kingdom of God, I am inclined to seek first my own personal glorification and aggrandizement, bending all of my efforts toward making myself look good. Instead of loving God above all and my neighbor as myself, I'm inclined to love myself above all and indeed to hate God and my neighbor. The entry writer goes on to say that although this sinful disposition can make it easier to commit a particular kind of sin, it gives this very interesting example of gluttonous for drinking another coffee beyond what he should. Okay. But a sinful disposition is neither necessary nor sufficient for committing a sinful act. All right, so just because you're disposed to do something doesn't mean that you are going to do it. But we're already seeing here this idea that to be sinful is not to center God. And I kind of dispute this idea that Plantinga sets up, where if you don't have God above all, you're putting yourself first. And if you're not glorifying God, then you must be seeking your own personal glorification. This is very freighted language here, because I'm just living my life and I have to survive and get by and do things. And I also want to enjoy myself. And I think that Christians also want to enjoy themselves. They add a layer of God in where I don't see it's necessary. But this notion of if I don't have God, then I must be seeking glorification, I think that this is all coming from the wrong area. It's not understanding a person's life who doesn't have God in it. But when Christians say, oh, you're making an idol of yourself, or you're making an idol of a hobby or your job or whatever it is, this is what they're talking about. This kind of language that Plantinga is using is exactly that, making an idol. But I want us to focus in on the sin as disposition. We are not directing our energy to the right object. We love and hate the wrong things. We are not centering God appropriately. And that's going to lead us into the 7 deadly sins and the virtues. Let's go to that next. I don't want to do a whole history of these qualities, but I did learn that it was a 4th century monk who came up with 8 deadly sins. Now, he was writing to help guide other monks on their spiritual journey, so these were never intended for the general public or the usual normal Christian. But other Christians did take these up, mix them with some works by Greek philosophers going back to Plato, and eventually we ended up with the magic number 7 vices with their 7 opposing virtues. I don't want to say that all of these are terrible. Some could serve as inspiration for better behavior in the world. What I do find is that by labeling normal behavior as a sin, people promoting these vices and virtues are stigmatizing behavior. I think humans are better served by exploring why they have certain feelings or tendencies and what they want to do with them, how they want to act on them. So, having said that, let's start at the top where we have chastity and lust as a pairing. Now, you can read any number of Christians who talk about God having designed sexuality for specific purposes, one of those being reproduction, obviously. The other is for the couple trying to conceive of a child to forge their bond. I've read that Christians think that the 2 souls become one during sex because that's what God wants to have happen. Anything that strays from that straight married couple trying to create another life, that is wrong. So that not even every practice that heterosexual couples have in the bedroom follows God's plan. Now, of course, you could talk to any number of Christians and they'll have all kinds of things to say, so it's not like they all agree on this, but that's roughly what this vice and virtue are setting up as. And chastity is abstaining from sex unless you're trying to create a child or forge your bond. So once again, even in a straight relationship, you would be abstaining from certain practices because it's not a part of God's plan. Needless to say, I find this terrible advice, and I think that we all get to decide what to do with our own bodies, and that includes sex. And that when we come together with other people and create relationships, the touchstone is informed consent with safe sex parameters. And after that, have fun, enjoy your life. I find that this particular pairing of chastity and lust, in addition to being shaming of natural human behavior and saying it's wrong to have the urges you might have, it's also denying of life. So I'm looking for life-affirming actions and activities and thoughts. This is saying that you should not enjoy your body in the here and now if sex is something that you want to enjoy. Interestingly enough, if you are asexual, that would also be wrong because, again, God has designed sexuality to procreate. So you should be enjoying your sexuality for that purpose, whether or not you do. So all around, this is wrong, and it's denying of ourselves and our natures as humans. Let's move on to the next pairing, which is temperance and gluttony. Now, gluttony tends to be defined as any disordered eating, not just eating too much, but eating too fast, enjoying it too much. Really, you're supposed to be seeking to eat the exact amount that your body needs to move forward. And again, all the sources say, oh, you should enjoy your food too, just not too much. I'm not sure where that not too much line starts, and we can get very judgmental very quickly as humans to think that we have the correct line, but our neighbors don't have that line. So that's another place where this gets a little fuzzy. This is another one that I think denies life because food is frankly something that we all enjoy, and it is a place where we get pleasure. And to say don't take that pleasure, you should always be denying yourself, is another place where these are not life-affirming because the goal is elsewhere. The goal is where God is. It's in the afterlife. To really enjoy your food is to be in the here and now. Gluttony, I think, would also relate to drinking, drugs, and any kind of partying behavior. That would all fit into this. Whereas temperance says that we should be depriving ourselves. So yeah, not very life-affirming. Moving on to the third pairing, we have charity and greed. Now this one, I think we have something that could be more inspirational, although once again, not a fan of the shaming language of if you are holding on to something, it's a sin. Now, it's important to say that greed here doesn't just mean wanting things, but it is an excessive wanting of things. Once again, we can get into some kind of judgmental thinking about who's to say what is the right amount of accumulating of worldly goods. In a life-affirming way, I think we should get the things that make us happy, that bring us happiness, things that are useful. I agree that excessive accumulation is not good. I also agree that the virtue that is paired charity is a good thing to cultivate. And you can actually do both. You can actually accumulate a lot and give to charity. These are not mutually exclusive. But overall, I think this has room for some kind of real inspiration, something that can help us live our lives. Because in the end, I think holding on to too many goods and accumulating, that actually can hold us back in life and not help us affirm the kind of life. But it's something to think about. It's a practice to think about. There's not necessarily a right behavior to land on. I also think that there is room for shaming within the church, as in, you should not be holding on to your possessions. You should be giving to the church because the church is what's doing good. I'm just saying that's what they will say. I don't think that that is the truth. So there is room with this actually to manipulate people, and that is not good. But if you just want to take it on a personal level and say, how much worldly goods do I want, need, etc., and what do I want to give away? What charity do I want to give? I think this is a good question to ask ourselves. The next pairing, Diligence and Sloth, I was interested to read that this is not actually about work. The sloth in question, which you can see underneath it, these Latin words, acadia and tristitia, which translate to sadness and sort of a depressed affect, it's actually about not cultivating a spiritual practice. And the diligence is we need to be diligent about a spiritual practice. And as far as I'm concerned, that's off the table. We don't need to do that. I'm not even sure what a spiritual practice means. I mean, sometimes you hear people say, I like to go look at nature and that's my spiritual practice. Well, I like to look at nature too, and I like hiking and I like looking at trees and birds. It's not spiritual. It's just a part of connecting to some part of our world. But anyway, so other than that, get this off the table. Now, if it is about work and what we owe to our families and our jobs and how we contribute to society, I think this is an interesting thing to think about of how much diligence, how much time away do we need. I think we do need to cultivate a kind of balance of I give to my community, my society, to my family. There's work that needs doing, things need taking care of, and other times I need to take care of myself and I need to relax. That's not what this was originally about, but I do think that there can be something inspirational. Again, not too keen on the very shaming language around sloth, laziness, where maybe somebody isn't actually being lazy, they're taking a break that they need so that they can do better work. But I still think, as something to think about, this is not the worst. The next pairing, patience and wrath. Now, another good one that I think that people should think about. Wrath here is not really any anger, although when you do some of the reading around this, some people do seem to consider any ordinary expression of anger to be wrath. But there you go. That's where these things are open to some interpretation. One of the things that worries me is that there is room for righteous anger in these writings. So if there really is some injustice and you're angry about that, that is a-okay. But that's very much in the eye of the beholder. So what I think is a righteous anger, somebody else might not think that's the righteous anger. If the wrath is that you get angry at people who are weak and who are human, that's where patience should come in, where I think that is a good thing to think about is, here's a person that is stumbling in life, and instead of being angry at them, I express patience and I try to help them. One of the ideas is that people who are wrathful will actually commit acts of violence, that becoming an angry person will make you a violent person. And that I reject. Sure, some people, that happens to some people, but I think everybody experiences anger. That doesn't mean that you're now going to kill somebody. And this is one of the slippages that I see Christians do. If you'll break one rule, then you're going to break all of these rules. Like, these are all different things. The harm that is caused is different. So just because you get angry doesn't mean you'll kill somebody. Just because you'll sleep outside of marriage with somebody doesn't mean that you're going to rob somebody. But a lot of people seem to have this notion of if you'll break one law, you'll break any law, anything goes, which I reject. I think that that's just totally wrong. Let's move down to the next pairing, which is kindness and envy. Envy, you got your coveting. This can lead to stealing. It can lead to all kinds of bad behavior if you envy. And we need to meet that with kindness. And instead of envying people, we should be kind toward them. Now, I do think that it is good to check yourself when you find out that you're envious of other people. You might want to say, what is making me envious? Why do I want that? And then maybe you can correct something in yourself. I think to make it a vice, this thought crime, and we saw this with the 10 Commandments as well as coveting, that shaming kind of thing is not helpful. And just say, don't feel that way. Just be kind to people. I don't think that's helpful. You need to figure out why you're envious. Also, the assumption that because you envy, you'll do something wrong, like you'll steal or you'll cause harm to your neighbor. I reject that. That doesn't mean anything. You could be envious and sit in your room and do nothing wrong. But here we go. The last of the pairings is humility and pride. Pride is one of the vices going way back to the ancients, and you probably have read about hubris, and a lot of myths are about characters who thought they were better than the gods. And here, this is thinking that you are better than everybody else, you're superior, and you need to meet that with humility. Now, I think of all of these, that's actually the best of these. To think that you're better than other people, that's probably not good. To feel good about yourself, to feel the kind of pride where I'm proud of myself, I'm glad of that, that's not what this particular vice is about. Although there's room for people to manipulate you and make you feel bad for feeling good about something that you have that is good and say, no, you should be humble about that. By the way, if the point of these virtues and vices is to make us more like God, to have us approach His way of being, they all fail. God doesn't have a body, so He doesn't desire any kind of sex or food or material possessions. So you might think, well, we are supposed to deny our physical selves for this reason. But God doesn't have to deny any of this. He doesn't experience the needs to deny them. Why did He even create us with bodies if it is only for us to deny the positive experiences they provide us? He could have made us like angels. Oh well, I guess He has a plan. God doesn't have a spiritual practice to be diligent about, so this doesn't bring us nearer to him. As for the last three, God specifically shows wrath in the Bible. God specifically says he's a jealous God. Jealousy is not quite envy, but it's similar. He can't tolerate humans not worshiping him. And just read the book of Job to see Yahweh's pride. He can wrestle with Leviathan, etc. He's the biggest badass of the Afterlife gang. So pretty much fail all around about being closer to God on these virtues and vices. Now, I don't want to leave people with the impression that I think that these are all just bad overall. There are practices that challenge us on our consumption of food and worldly goods and our pleasure seeking. Stoicism, slow living, minimalism, other philosophies too, also posit that paring down what we own, what we consume, what experiences we seek out will bring a greater sense of ease and satisfaction with our lives. The difference I see is that these modes of living are about how we live our lives. They are about how we can achieve well-being with less. It's not about denying this life and living in sacrifice as a way to appease a being who purportedly wants to spend eternity with us. These other philosophies also challenge the status seeking that comes with collecting objects or fancy experiences. Again, to create a greater sense of satisfaction and ease with our lives. The other difference is that the purpose isn't to shame humans for being who we are. Instead of thinking it's just bad or wrong to collect objects, for example, we are supposed to ask ourselves questions about our consumption. Sure, any movement can make people compete with how much they adhere to the guidelines and so on, but religion can provide a way for authorities to control their members. The stigma of shame looms over normal behavior. In some groups, members who fail to adhere to the tenets can be shunned. I want to wrap up this video with something that puzzles me. God is said to love his creation, but we're told his wrath is righteous because he can't tolerate sin. But just being human and experiencing ourselves as imperfect humans is sin. So why did he make us into something he can't tolerate and will just anger him? He made this life for us, and now he asks us to deny it? Does this make sense? So remember all this when you hear Christians talk about sin. It presumes evil action, but really it's just about being human most of the time, failing to center God appropriately by denying the very nature God created us to inhabit. Sin needs to be rejected as a concept. It's not about wrongdoing at all. It's not really about evil. Anyway, who is the one telling us about sin? It's other humans. God himself is not in this discussion. So other humans want us to stop enjoying ourselves because they think some cosmic dude will throw us in a lake of fire. Not manipulative at all, right? So what strikes you about sin and these vices and virtues? Put it in the comments below. And while you're down there, like, subscribe, and do all the YouTube stuff. You're on YouTube, you know what to do. And if you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee. Link is in the description below. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.